After our recent posts on AI, you could be forgiven for wondering what the hell is an accounting company doing talking about AI? Is it just getting on the bandwagon? Yeah, sure, it's a trendy topic, but no, that's not it. This is something we've got quite a bit of history with. So William Gibson is famed for this particular quote: "The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed." I think that's absolutely true when it comes to AI. It's been around for a long time, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about why Aegis Accounting is talking about AI, why it's relevant to us, what our history is involved with it, and what we're doing now and where we're going in the future. So a little bit of our history then, going back a little bit before the current incarnation of Aegis Accounting. At the very start of personal computing and getting computing into businesses, we had adverts like this from IBM. You can see this is not a corporation, this is a fairly small company office, and that computer there and the printer in the background, those are systems that IBM wanted to put into those kinds of businesses. So there were lots of consultants helping put computers into those businesses and work often on the financial stuff, order taking, sales, invoice generation, and linking through to the accounts. Lots of custom database stuff, and that's part of our organizational history. This is something we used to do, so it's not surprising that we are not just, let's say, the professional accounting side, but perhaps have more of an interest in the computing and the database and that kind of angle of things for small businesses too. We have history in it, and in fact around that time, in the early 90s, we had this rise in what were called expert systems that were applied to accounting, trying to ask complicated questions in a specific series to regular people working in the business to get the proper data into the system and work with it so that there were good financial records. And indeed, I was surprised to see that even this one was referring artificial intelligence already, and new expert systems were there, but even then there was talk about using AI in those systems. Well, that's fine, but that's a long time ago. In the more modern incarnation of Aegis Accounting, we were using tools like Xero. Now, Xero is very popular. We still use it today. We think it's a great platform. But it's quite complicated for a particular set of clients that we were trying to work with at that time. We wanted to, about 5 years ago, we wanted to start really helping small business owners, sometimes sole traders who maybe don't have a computer, only have a tablet or a smartphone to hand, and we wanted to appeal to them. But the idea was, why don't we make a very simple app, much simpler than that, that allows the handful of transactions they probably have to be recorded, but there's a big problem with making an app. So I'd come out of the mobile industry, getting involved with the family business. I thought maybe I'd be able to help with that, but I was aware of this big problem. Fragmentation is a huge issue in the Android world, at least, and at the time most of the people we were dealing with have Android phones and some have iOS. This is just showing the differences in operating systems between the two. If you have an app, you need to make it work across all of these. That's a lot of testing. That's before you realize and have to deal with each device being subtly different and having its own requirements. Apps are not a world that I really want to get into. It's just too complicated. That's maybe something where an agency would best handle that incredible complexity. I was trying to understand the very basics of this and starting down this road when we learned that there was this thing called Actions on Google. This is where you can use Google Assistant to talk to an application that lives essentially on the cloud and is able to be accessed via voice. Now think back to 2017 when this was announced. Around that time we really thought that Siri, Alexa and Google Assistant were going to be the primary way that a lot of things were going to get done. Surely it's simpler to talk to your devices. We may not have actually ended up with that as a reality, but that's certainly what we thought at the time. So what this helped us with at the time is it meant that it became Google's responsibility to make sure their Assistant works on every phone, and we can just make sure that we can work with Google Assistant. And the reason we chose Google Assistant rather than the others is because Google Assistant can be installed on an iPhone as well, and it can be installed on Amazon devices. So it was the least friction way of getting something super simple out to be able to help those really, really small sole traders who don't have great requirements for using software. So this is where we've gone into. Where AI comes into this is not in us implementing AI per se. There's a little bit of that, but not massive amounts. But leveraging the AI that was used for natural language processing, which was how Google Assistant recognizes your voice and turns it into text, throws it on the internet somewhere and does something with it. This meant that we were going to leverage that capability to be able to serve our prospective clients and our clients a little bit better. So this is what we did. We then created the Google Assistant action where you could speak to it and it would record the things and it would speak conversationally and be able to pull out the information from what you tell it. No need for any complicated software, no need to install anything. You can literally just say to your assistant, talk to the bean counter. That would be enough. And it worked brilliantly. I was really pleased with it. Absolutely fantastic. There's a whole tutorial on how it used to work. I say used to work, I'll get to that in a minute, which you can find online. I'll make a link to it. There was basically little more than an entry in a directory for Google Assistant, looking a little bit like this, but there was no expectation anyone's going to find anything this way. No one's going to be pouring through the directory reading for what they can do with a Google Assistant. I think that's a big problem that has happened with Alexa skills and Google Assistant actions is there was always a big discoverability problem. It became our responsibility to market the solution and have people find it, because otherwise they wouldn't know it exists. There were loads and loads of things there. So although we were able to be the first ever way to record your sales, expenses and mileage with only your voice, doesn't mean many people knew about it. And sales and marketing was a different problem we were yet to tackle well. So yeah, it didn't massively take off, but we did have a couple of existing clients to make use of it, and we thought we were going to make a bigger deal of it, only something else happened in the meantime. Before I go into what happened next, I'll tell you a little bit about how this is to do with AI and how it works and why this gives us some chops in the field and able to talk about it. We didn't employ someone to do this. I coded it. I had to solve these problems myself. This was using a platform called Dialogflow. That platform still exists. It didn't belong to Google then, it belongs to Google now. And essentially it's a way of interpreting when you say something, what did you mean and what were you trying to do? Not in the modern way that large language models that you might already know about, like ChatGPT, can understand things. They're much better at it now than this was. But this you could load with some templates of things you were capable of doing, and it would be able to try and detect your intent by looking at the list of this menu of things it can do and trying to match it. So for example, you see some here where the user would be able to ask to record a sale, they'll be asked to record an expense, record mileage, and there's pages and pages of these, many subtly different ones, because you are very much managing the flow. If you gave ChatGPT in a one long prompt the request to obtain from a user a list of information, you could then leave it asking until it had all the information. That wasn't available when we developed this, so we had to manually figure out what's left, what don't we know, and how to ask for it. Dialogflow didn't then go and do the work of saving that into a back end somewhere. It needed a fulfillment in the background to do so. So I had to learn how to code in a fulfillment. We use Firebase functions. It is essentially Node.js, so I had to become familiar with that platform. big long files. Initially it was a monster. It's stinky code, but it is reliable and works, so there's little point in making it super nice looking. I'm the only maintainer, I know what's in it, but it is lots and lots of code in JavaScript on the back end, saving information from a user into Firebase and then pulling it out and being able to show it later. You can't do everything by voice, so we also coded a web app interface to exactly the same data. And that's how we did it. So all of that code would then execute when you speak. Google Assistant would understand it, turn it into text. It would pass it along to Dialogflow, which would match it to an intent. The intent was really good at extracting information like times, dates, money, and would then be able to send that information to the back end to Firebase functions, which would then store things in the database, look things up, and basically drive the flow of what would happen next. And it was really complicated and it took a long time to implement, but it was exactly the kind of project I could take on when I first joined the family business, because we just had children and I was coming home to look after them primarily. They spent a lot of time sleeping, but it's not like I can work continuously for any period of time. I could sit down and do, improve one use case over 2 hours, that kind of thing. So over time, we ended up implementing it, and I was, very proud. And the code is still there, but as I say, there were some bigger problems. There were two major developments. The first one happened quite soon after finishing it. As often happens in innovation projects, some other innovation may make it perhaps somewhat redundant. We had open banking come into the UK. It was on the way in around 2018, 2019. It started rolling out. What this meant is it would be a much better solution than speaking your transactions to your mobile phone if we were already linked into your bank account and had the data. Now, bank feeds already existed for Xero, but they were hacky. Or direct feed agreements I had with certain banks. We couldn't guarantee that it would work across all banks. Open banking somewhat mandates that. The principle is the data belongs to the customer. They should be able to access it and allow third-party apps to access it. So that changed things. And then along came a service called Coconut, which at the time offered a current account for sole traders that automatically categorize those transactions, therefore cutting down on some of the bookkeeping work as well, and had a platform for us accountants to get in. So that was absolutely brilliant. And even though they got rid of the current account and started using open banking in any account you already had, it was a great solution. We still really like it. We still often recommend it to sole traders, so much so that we became inaugural members of the Coconut Accountant Advisory Board, helping sort of steer how they would move on with that activity. So that made the bean counter less of a big deal. We basically used it somewhat like a jewel, big and shiny and attractive, and a way of conveying who we are and what we do. Yes, we're technical, we can be innovative, we're not staid, boring, only do it by the old ways accounting practice. We're modern and make new solutions when we need them, and we're able to sort of convey ourselves well by showing it off, even though in practice it's only a complement to these other tools. It's still a great way of recording mileage because it uses Google Maps APIs to figure out the mileage between two destinations when you remember it 2 days later and just put it in your account. That's quite useful. Then the second thing happened, and Google Actions, or Actions on Google, went into sunset. A posh way of saying they got rid of it. Mainly the reason being that they wanted to engage with mobile apps more than independent applications that existed on the cloud or the internet somewhere but didn't have an app on the device. Probably they saw most users used it that way or discovered things were available that way. Let's say you have the Fitbit app on your phone, and then you might be prompted within that app that you could just use Google Assistant to make some of those things that happen in the app happen hands-free. A big part of the use case, and I think they realized that the discovery problem is not going to go away, but there's already a solved discovery problem for apps, or perhaps an accepted discovery problem for apps. Everyone knows they've got to market it as being available and put it in people's hands themselves, and they don't rely on Google to do that for them. So that's what they wanted to move to. And so June 13th this year, it went away, and we no longer have the bean counter available to speak to. The web app still exists, but the web app went away. The voice bot went away. And Google pivoted towards this way of doing things. Deep linking into existing apps like PayPal, for example. So that's where we are now. We learned a lot of lessons about how to implement that. We learned a lot of lessons about things, how to handle when natural language processing goes wrong. It didn't understand what happened. So many error flows. It's impossible to overemphasize how much the majority of what went into that we're dealing with the errors, being able to re-ask questions and understand when it became noisy. If you're using your microphone in a noisy environment, maybe you didn't really understand what you said, and to have user-friendly ways of, say, switching to typing. So it's not so annoying. You've seen so many chatbots are annoying. We worked really, really hard to try and make it so that was not what would happen when you're using the service, but we couldn't control Google Assistant mishearing you. We could control handling when we don't understand what we got as data, but we couldn't control that front end. It didn't belong to us. So now we're back down to the web app, and hopefully at some point it will come back because we can still use Dialogflow to interact with other systems. We can get, for example, a little chat function within the web app itself. So the web app is extremely simple now, cut down to just showing us the transactions and the places that are in your account, and seeing a list of those things. Outstanding ones that may have needed to be approved, and a list between certain due dates that you can choose and filter, edit, amend, all the things you'd expect to be able to do, but as simple as it could possibly be. So how are we using AI now? Well, the problem that we're trying to solve at the moment is the front end of the business. We need to reach people, reasonably a lot of people, in order to discover those who would be able to make use of our services. We're still trying to crack the sales and marketing problem. It's a challenge. There are services that out there starting to leverage AI in their processes to be able to do that. An example is Lemlist. Lemlist is a relatively well-known way of having a predefined sequence of emails, for example, to do cold outreach. When you have a list of emails, it will do that. It will do that with pretty good best practice. Hopefully not the nastiest spam you've ever received, although I'm sure you can put junk in and have terrible stuff come out. If you put decent content in and have a good template for follow-ups, then you may succeed in reaching people who've never heard of you before, them understanding about your business, and some being interested in what you do. But it isn't the cheapest platform, starting at $60 per month, up to $100 in this, this middle one. It is expensive, and there are still a need for tokens on top of that for using AI credits. Well, we've already been experimenting with AI. I already have my API key with OpenAI. If you've watched the other video, you know that we've already been doing quite a lot of specific flows with AI. And so I wanted to be able to recreate this also in a very tailored way. I wanted to recreate it in a way that's maybe cross-platform, not just email, but email and text. Maybe other platforms too in the future. I wanted it to be able to do something which I was most impressed with by CheatLayer. CheatLayer had a great autonomous agent that would follow up and respond to sales emails. So I think the way I saw it demonstrated first was an initial email is sent out. It's pretty much standard email. And if anyone replies to that, then the conversation is had by an AI agent who knows about the business and tries to get them to arrange a call. Fairly decent idea. It's a restricted use case. You're just going to have short conversations driving to talking to a real person, so not too much opportunity to go off the rails. But I had a real trouble squeezing enough contextual information about our business in so that it would reliably talk about the business like it knows it and actually drive towards those phone calls. A lot of the time it would slip into helpful assistant mode like ChatGPT, make anything seem possible because it's trying to be helpful, and forget to drive to the call, completely ignoring the fact that that's what it's there for, stopping being a sales agent and being a helpful assistant. Not ideal. And I struggled to do that. If I'd have pushed it further, maybe I'd have got there. I'm sure it will improve and be better in the future, but I decided to use automation tools instead. So how we're using it at the moment is a little bit like Zapier. So here's an example of what Zapier can do. If you're not familiar with Zapier, although it is very well known, it's a good way of automating things simply. So for example, this example flow that they've got as a suggestion is, linking when a new email comes in, the chat goes to OpenAI and it generates a completion and then can respond to the email. Actually, I wasn't able to do this. I did try in Zapier, but it would not let me link ChatGPT to Gmail, as if there was a specific service restriction, like it wasn't allowed to do that. That was annoying. I mean, it was a simple workaround. I made it do a webhook call, and then I had a separate one for the webhook call to be received to send a response. And it did work, but it wasn't flexible enough. I wasn't able to do quite what I wanted with it, and so I wanted to find more flexible automation. I mean, I've been coding in Node and JavaScript for a long time now, so I quite often bump against the limitations of these automation platforms when they won't let me do something that I know could be simply done with a bit of code. And the best platform I've found to be able to do that is N8N. What's really useful about N8N, apart from being able to handle much more complex flows, including this example here is that they're showing is it's obviously popular, is using OpenAI to do interacting with leads. Not sending emails in this case, it's trying to do some lead enrichment work, which is the current problem that I'm trying to solve, so that's ideal, although I have a different way of doing it. What's really useful about it is it has these code blocks. So the code blocks are very powerful because it is basically JavaScript running in a Node environment. You can even require modules in. So it's very powerful, and I can use it to have a tightly structured problem that's programmatic and then use AI within it to do something. It was a bit tricky to set up because there's one really useful thing in Zapier. It keeps the chat history, whereas in N8N it's just using the API and it's up to you to keep your chat history. So I had to go beyond that, and I had to again get back involved with Firebase and basically make an extremely simple CRM system that keeps chat history, and then this flow will get that data and pull it back in if a conversation is actually ongoing. So I have a couple of these automations. One is outreach. It's not very automated. It has very little to do with OpenAI, but it goes into the CRM history that OpenAI will then use as a ChatGPT conversation to continue if someone actually responds and asks a question. And it's much, much better at me having a system level instruction, because it uses the API, which includes all of our knowledge about all the knowledge I want to give it about our services and how they work. So it's much more able to have a conversation that can genuinely pull from what we do. And also with this structure, I'm able to branch by using OpenAI to assess the content of the original conversation and decide whether it's going to just respond or whether it's going to accept someone doesn't want to be contacted anymore, politely say sorry for bothering you and no longer contact them, mark them as such, because it's the right thing to do. Or is that someone asking for a call, in which case send them these specific links. when I tried to put all those ifs, buts, maybes into cheat layer in one big prompt and let it as an autonomous agent deal with that, it wasn't consistent. It was as if there was too much information in the context and it couldn't handle that many rules all at once. Whereas with a specific flow like this, it can. And yeah, as it says here, it really is built for technical people. You will face errors. One of the great things about it that meant I was confident using this in particular is the source code is available and it can be self-hosted. Now, I didn't actually succeed in self-hosting it. I started trying. I'm not that familiar with Kubernetes. It's new to me. And the cost of running it online would have been quite similar to using N8N's cloud subscription anyway. So I just went with their subscription. But as soon as I bump against the limitations of that, I'll be able to get this running locally somewhere. And you know, there's a way of scaling it. So that is how we are using AI now. We're using it at the front end of the business. We're using it for those very time-consuming conversations that may not turn into anything and are usually extremely simple queries. So how do we handle payroll? How often do you tell me whether I can take dividends? All these questions that we may get are in a knowledge base, and an AI can query that knowledge base effectively, efficiently, and with the right prompting, respond in a tone that I would want to respond from our business about it. So that's how we're using it today. So you've heard how we've used AI in the past with our chatbot, our voice-based chatbot. You've heard how we're using it now at the front end of the business. And if you've watched our recent video, you'll have seen how we're trying to use it in the future. Agents are powerful, but they need more guidance than I'm currently able to give in one messy single chunk of text of context. Watch the other video, I'll make a link to it. It talks about how we've managed to make an AI follow a workflow, but essentially it's plant UML, and we were working on an activity that defines a flow, explains it in code that a ChatGPT or a Claude or any of those can actually interpret and follow, at least with the proof of concepts that we've gone through. It's starting to become quite complicated, so I'm excited to get it doing the first complicated problem. And for us, that's lead enrichment. If we have only a name of a director and the name of a limited company and their address, can we then find contact details? A human armed with a browser would be able to in many cases. Oh, I want an agent to be able to do that reliably, and actually mapping out how that works is quite a complicated flow. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope that tells you why, as an accounting practice, we're talking about AI. It's not because we just want to jump on the trend. We're actively using it. We have done before. We're using it now, and we really plan to leverage it in the future. And I think many of you in our audience are quite entrepreneurial, technical people. Lots of you working in agency type settings. This kind of thing is going to be interesting to you, I hope. If you have any questions about how we've done any of this, drop it in the comments. You know what to do. You know how to get in contact. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.